Reggie here, your friendly neighborhood bodybuilder and comic book collector, and I want to welcome you to another one of my recordings. In this recording, I am going to spend a little bit of time talking about some recent market research that I conducted here on the channel. Some research that I'm actually quite proud of. I'm very proud of this particular project, and I'm going to explain why in just a moment. But if you haven't yet had a chance to watch the video that I released recently on this market research, I definitely want to encourage you to go back and watch that video, because in that video, I actually spend time going through all of the survey responses in great detail. I'm not going to do that in this recording. I'm actually going to spend a little bit of time talking about a couple of data points that were meaningful in my mind. Whereas the previous video, I actually go through all of the findings in great detail. So if you haven't seen that recording, that video, I definitely want to encourage you to go back and watch that. If you search for Regie Collects Market Research, you should be able to find it on the YouTube machine. So the question is, why am I proud of this project that I took on? And I think there's several reasons why I'm actually proud of this. I'm proud of it because I've never really seen a research project of this sort with comic book collectors. And well, let me restate. I have seen some survey responses that were done back in the day. And I found them online. It was back in the day, someone had undertaken some kind of market research project, and I saw some responses from a survey. Not necessarily how I actually did this one, but I certainly have never seen a YouTuber do something like this. So I'm very proud of that, of being able to do something that is a little different and a little unique. And if there's someone out there that has done it, you have my apologies. I'm simply not aware of it, but in my experience, I have not necessarily seen this. Now, this research project is not perfect. To do, a true market research thing, there are people that are trained to do this, right? I am not trained to do it. I'm a marketer who uses market research for the purpose of making decisions for the company that I work for, the companies that I've worked for in the past. I influence and inform market research surveys, but I don't necessarily create them. And so this thing is not perfect by any stretch of the imagination, but it is definitely really cool, right? And I say that because as a comic book community, as a content creator myself, we spend a lot of time talking about I think, I believe, I feel like, right? And what this research does is it actually gives us some data points that we can actually point to, and we can point to those data and have a little bit of comfort in that data. We can have a little bit of comfort that the responses are real and they tell us something. Now, here's the thing. There were 200 people that responded to this particular survey. And that's actually a respectable number of individuals for market research. I have personally made lots of decisions based upon fewer respondents. I've done market research with, 100 respondents, and I've been able to make some decisions based upon, what I want to do based upon those responses. And so to get 200 individuals to participate and to give us feedback and insight, that is a respectable number. And the idea is that it would be great if you could poll 1 million people or 1,000 people, or if you could, poll all comic book collectors. That would definitively tell you certain things, but that's pretty tough. That's pretty impossible to do. But what you can do is you can survey a small group of people and kind of extrapolate out to the larger group, right? And so 200 people is a respectable number to be able to draw some conclusions about the larger group of comic book collectors out there. And so we don't have to necessarily say, I think, I believe, I hope. We actually can point to some actual data with some assurance and with some reliability that these things are sort of true, right? And so again, it's part of the reason why I'm really proud of this research. I'm really proud of this project, because we have some insight into a couple of things, and that's what I want to talk about in this particular recording. And one of the things that really jumped out at me here was this notion that most speculators, at least those that participated in this market research project, actually see themselves as collectors. right? So most speculators that were respondents in this market research actually see themselves as collectors. And I think that this is a very important data point. And I think that it's important for several reasons. There are a lot of people out there that believe that we are headed towards a comic book crash. And I think that they believe that because they believe that there is too much speculation in the hobby. They believe that there are people that don't read comics, that don't really enjoy comics, but are simply in comics for the purpose of being able to make money, the speculators and the investors. And in this research, what we discovered is that 77 of the 201 respondents were speculators/investors. 77 out of 201 were speculators/investors. 192 are collectors. And because respondents could actually select multiple ways to categorize themselves, it tells me that there is a healthy number of overlap between those speculators and those that believe that they are also collectors as well. Now, if those numbers had been flipped, if there were 192 respondents that said that they were speculators and the number of collectors was smaller at 77, I would be uncomfortable with that, because what that would tell me is that the large majority, if you will, of respondents are in it simply for the money. But that is not necessarily the case, right? This tells me that there are collectors out there who speculate versus speculators who collect, or just people that are purely into speculation. This gives me a great deal of comfort because it tells me that there are people that are out there that are doing speculation, which is perfectly fine. But they're also doing it because they're collectors, and potentially what they're doing is speculating on modern comics for the purpose of being able to buy comics that are more expensive, Silver Age, Golden Age books that they really want for their collection. That is my belief. That is a little anecdotal, right? I'm looking at the data, yes, but I'm also layering on some anecdotal evidence that I've been able to glean from some of the comments on the original video where I presented some of the market research, but also with my one-on-one conversations that I've had with people. This data gives me comfort. It gives me comfort because collectors aren't necessarily in it for the money per se, right? We are in it because we love comics, we love stories, we love the artwork. We're in it for that. And the fact that 192 out of 200 respondents are like, yes, I am a collector, that gives me comfort. If it was, again, 192 speculators, then I would be uncomfortable. And so I think that this is, again, one of those data points that came out of the market research project that tells us something. It tells us, in my mind, that the comic book hobby is somewhat stable. It is somewhat stable because people are categorizing themselves as collectors, which means that they are buying comics for the purpose of holding those comics in their collection. And again, if you go back to the original video, you will actually see that there are people that are buying lots of comics on a weekly basis. I mean, there are folks that are buying, 25 or so comics every single week. A healthy portion, 45% of respondents actually buy somewhere between 6 and 15 comics every single week. There is a much smaller group of individuals that are buying somewhere between 16 and 25 books, and an even smaller group, 13 individuals that actually buy 25 or more comics per week. This tells me again that we are sorta in a stable type of market, in the sense that there are more collectors than speculators. Because there are more collectors, they are buying these comics for the purpose of holding them in their collection. Are they flipping some for the purpose of buying additional books? Probably. Again, just an interesting statistic that came out of this research that kind of jumped out at me. One of the other data points that I want to highlight in this recording is the fact that 32% of respondents have actually been collecting comics for less than 3 years. To me, that is actually a solid statistic. That is actually a solid statistic to me, that 1/3 of respondents have been collecting for fewer than 3 years. And I find that statistic comforting. and also enlightening, because one of the questions that people have always asked is how many new people are coming into the hobby? Are there new people coming into the hobby, or is the hobby starting to age, right? What this says to me is that there are new people, new blood coming into the comic book hobby, coming into the comic book community. And again, that gives me a great deal of comfort, because there are people that are flowing in, right? And when you dig into the data, what you see is that roughly 10% of people, or about 19 or so respondents, have actually been in the hobby for less than a year. And when you go up, a roughly 23% of respondents have actually been in the hobby for somewhere between 1 to 3 years. And then from there, there's an additional 11% that have actually been in the hobby for 4 to 7 years. And again, these are good numbers. These are good numbers because, again, there is new blood that is coming into the hobby. And then there's also a healthy number of people that have been in the hobby for longer periods of time. And in fact, when you dig into the data, you basically see that 56% of people have actually been into the hobby for 8 or more years. Now, this is where the survey wasn't perfect, right? This is one of the areas, because I should have parsed it out. I should have asked questions around consecutive years in the hobby, because technically I've been in the hobby almost 8 years, but it's spread between me collecting for some time in the 90s, me collecting for some time in the early 2000s, and then me being back in the hobby since 2017. So kind of sort of, I'm at 8 years. And so the better question would have been around consecutive years in the hobby. But again, this tells us, again, that there are people that are still coming into the hobby. And this is a good thing. And one of the things that I hope to be able to maybe find out in a later market research project is, how did these people find their way to the hobby? Were they influenced by movies or something like that, or by TV shows or by streaming services? Are those things part of the way that they found their way to the hobby, right? Did they watch a movie and decide to seek out the source material? That's actually something that I want to dig into, right? But one of the other things that I wanted to mention about this, 32% of respondents that have actually been collecting for under 3 years. Some people might say, well, I would want that number to be bigger. I would want that number to be 50% or something like that. And I would argue that that could potentially be a negative. That could potentially be a negative thing. If the number of new people were that high, potentially what that could say is that there is a lot of turnover in the hobby. It could say that there were a lot of new people, but not necessarily people that have stayed around in the hobby, if so many of them were that new. There could also be a little bit of bias, if you will, because of where the survey was conducted. The survey was conducted on my channel, and my channel appears to new collectors, those that are newly returning to the hobby, and those that have also been in the hobby. So there could be, a little bit of selection bias there based upon the people that were attracted to the survey because they saw it on my channel. But I would also say that there were people that shared this survey on Instagram, on Facebook, on Twitter, on email, right? So I know that it went beyond the channel, but I just kind of wanted to mention that bias as well. But again, I find comfort in the fact that roughly 1/3 of respondents are actually new people. If the number were higher, I would be concerned. If the number were lower, I would be concerned. But again, 1/3 of them is not a bad thing at all. So one of the last things that I want to talk about before I wrap this recording up is the notion that, and this is certainly less serious than the other two, but there is this notion out there that Image Comics is an independent publisher. And I would make an argument that Image was once upon a time an independent publisher. But I don't know if we can say that now. I don't know if we can say that Image is an indie publisher. And I say that because when you look at the number of respondents that are actively buying Marvel, DC, and Image on a regular basis, the numbers are not bad. They're not bad for anyone, right? In fact, when you look at the data, 195 out of 201 respondents are buying Marvel, are reading Marvel, are collecting Marvel. The data suggests that roughly 80% of folks are reading, buying, collecting DC. and 71% of those are doing the same for image. I think that what you have to say is that image is, it is now the big three. It is not the big two, it is the big three. Now, image is doing some things differently than the other two, right? They are not necessarily the same. They are doing things differently, but I don't know if you can make the claim that image is an indie anymore, because when you look at the next publisher on the list, right? So we looked at Marvel. It's basically 97% of people are buying Marvel on a regular, 80% are buying DC on a regular, 71% are doing image. It falls off dramatically to basically 22%, or 45 individuals are reading, collecting, buying Valiant on a regular basis. I mean, it falls off dramatically down to Valiant, and then it falls off dramatically from there to Ablaze Studios or Ablaze Publishing. And part of the reason why I think Ablaze was represented was because I've been talking about them a whole lot over the last couple of weeks, and the cool stuff that they're actually doing with their Vampire State Building. I think a lot of people have actually taken note of that. And then even from Ablaze, it drops off dramatically when you get to Boom Studios, right? So Boom Studios only has 3.5% of respondents that are actually collecting, reading, and buying Boom on a regular basis. That's 7 people out of 201 respondents. And so again, I don't know that you can make the argument that Image is an independent publisher these days. I think that you have to look at it that there's a big three, and it is Marvel, DC, and Image, and then everybody else. Everything I've said is all my opinion, and I'm definitely curious what you all think. I'm definitely curious what your thoughts are as you reflect back upon the previous video with all of the market research findings, and certainly with the things that I've talked about in this video, in this recording. I definitely welcome your thoughts, because they could be different than mine. They could be the same. But these are just some of the things that I found interesting as I stared at the data and pontificated it a little more. So rest assured that we're going to be doing this market research project again, because I think that there was a lot of really great insight that came out of this first round. And so we're going to do it again, and we may do it a couple of different ways, digging a little bit deeper into a couple of areas, and to do it so that we can continue to get some insight from all of you out there. And so if you participated in this last round of market research, I want to say thank you, and I definitely want to encourage you to stay tuned. If you missed this first round, I definitely encourage you to stay tuned, because we'll be doing it again. And if you want to have your opinions heard, if you want to have your voice heard, I definitely want you to stay abreast of what's coming out from the channel so that you can participate. And I don't know exactly right now what shape or form this thing will take next time, but it will happen again, and it will probably happen a couple more times, because I think that this was fun. I think that it was enjoyable to basically create some data that we could all look towards and take away some of those, I believe, I assume, right? To be able to point at some data and say, well, based upon this market research, these respondents, we believe these things to be true based upon the strength of this data. That is a very, very different type of discussion to have when you actually have some data behind you. So if you enjoyed this recording, I definitely want to encourage you to hit the thumbs up, leave a comment behind. And if you need to reach out to me, feel free to do so at RegieCollects on Instagram and RegieCollects@gmail.com. Take care.